Hello, I hope you'll indulge me for delivering my Keith Farrer keynote address by video. I'm currently on leave with my wife and will be touching down in Berlin while you're all meeting. This is the big long service holiday we've been planning for a year, and I'm afraid the clash is completely unavoidable. The greatest honour anyone can have is to be recognised by their peers. So in accepting this honour, I'm appreciative but also humbled. I can only think that I've been recognised because of the efforts of all of the brilliant and passionate people I've worked with during my life in this great food and agribusiness industry. I'm reminded of an Anglican brother who was the master of boarding hostel I stayed in Dubbo High School in 1962, who was awarded an OBE. I'd never heard of an OBE, so I asked him what it was. And he explained to me about teamwork, but what he said was that it really stood for other brothers' efforts. For a 12-year-old boy, that was a huge lesson about what the benefit of teamwork was. I've been asked to talk about my life, something that I'm very uncomfortable doing. But as I put this speech together, it did remind me how our experiences and the people we meet along the way have such a tremendous influence on the sort of people we are and the principles that guide our lives. Most people who know me well will be familiar with these principles, as I have a tendency to share my views. Some people say preach. These guiding principles are: I believe that you must have goals, causes or beliefs that you're passionate about, but you must be true to the real you, and you must be prepared to give back for the greater good. I'm passionate about creating and nurturing opportunities for women. You have to believe in yourself and be prepared to have a go, but also to sometimes take a step back and try again. I believe you should reflect on your experiences and learn from them all. It is critical that we all maintain a good work-life balance, but that family must ultimately come first. I believe in the innate good intentions of people and their willingness to collaborate. There are no processes or products that can't be improved. We must constantly strive to improve and innovate. You will, I think, recognise these principles throughout my presentation. I feel as if I've worked in the food and agribusiness sector for all of my life, and certainly well before I graduated from university. I can recall picking up oranges that the pickers had dropped under the trees at Tarbogan, northwest of Griffith, in the Riverina, to earn pocket money when I was 8. I picked, pitted and trade apricots for drying when I was 9, and I picked Darjan plums at Lake Wyangan, also near Griffith, for drying into prunes when I was 10. I've chopped Bathurst burrs further north at Narromine when I was 12. I've mulesed and marked lambs when I was 13 and 14, and I sowed a crop of lucerne when I was 15. When I was 16, I drove wheat trucks 20 miles to the silo at Marunda, south of Narandra, and I made more pocket money actually from shuffling the trucks along the line while the drivers went to the pub. After their trucks were unloaded, I'd go and get them out of the pub, and they'd sling me just their loose change. Today, my wife and I still run a family farm at Yenda, where we're involved in mixed grain dry area farming and also a bit of irrigation where we grow rice. We're passionate about sustainable farming. We use minimum till, we return organic matter to the soil, and we're creating wildlife corridors around the property. You could say that it was natural that I'd follow a career in food and agribusiness, but it's actually not the case. As you can see, I grew up in the bush, but I grew up in a family that struggled to provide me and my 2 younger sisters and my brother with the best education and opportunities they could. My father ran away from home at 14 before finishing primary school because his violent father kept him away from school to work on the family farm. And until he met my mother, he was illiterate. My father came out of the Battle of El Alamein in World War II, badly wounded and suffering from what's now known as post-traumatic stress disorder. He could never return to the full-time work he did before the war and was eventually assessed as a totally and permanently incapacitated veteran. My mother, who was a city girl, was sent to a home economics high school because only boys in her Scottish family should receive a proper education. My mother ran away from home at 18 to join the Land Army, and during the war was sent to work on farms at Griffith, where she met and married my recuperating father after the war. My mother, however, always resented her lack of opportunity that was based only on her gender. A great lesson to me from my father was one of tolerance and also having a go. My father at El Alamein was a light anti-aircraft gunner, and the majority of the planes that he encountered were Italian Air Force, and when he arrived home he was confronted by a mass immigration of Italians to Griffith. He never showed any animosity, and in fact as a child we often had Italian kids around to our home. There was no place for intolerance in our family. I never had any doubt when I was a child that I'd finish high school and go to university. I had no idea what university was, but that's where my mother's elder brother had gone and received his PhD in physics after the war. I guess that's why I gravitated to science both at school and at university. It's interesting though to reflect on your life choices, and particularly my choice to study science. I did well at school at maths and science, but my passion was debating and public speaking, and for some time I reckoned that I'd be a barrister. Those of you who know my instinctive drive profile and my avoidance of detail would know that the law would have driven me nuts. My mother's influence is not the only reason I believe in equal opportunity for women. It does help that I married a strong woman and I have 2 daughters. My daughters share my belief that they can be anything they want to be, providing they're prepared to have a go. I was a bit of a ratbag at university, having moved into Wesley College from the country and finding myself free in the big city. I was passionate about racial discrimination, and I still wear as a badge of honour my arrest and jailing at the last Springbok Wallabies test played at the SCG in 1971. I was a registered conscientious objector to conscription, an inveterate marcher and demonstrator against the Vietnam War. My parents always supported me being passionate about a cause I cared for, but they did remind me that you can't lose sight of the big picture and that you must always maintain a sense of balance. I started my formal career in 1972 after graduating from Sydney University with my BSc Honours in Biochemistry. My real desire was to go to Roseworthy College in Adelaide to study wine science, but the intake there was only every second year, and this was the odd year out. I started looking at jobs I might do for 12 months and came across one job as a trainee brewer at Tooth & Company on Broadway. I thought that sounded pretty good because I'd developed quite good skills at beer drinking while I was at college, and so I applied and I was invited along for an interview. I couldn't believe it when I was offered the role, and I accepted enthusiastically. In discussions with my mates at the time, I said I wouldn't take a job that paid less than $5,000 a year, but Tooth's only offered me $4,980. I took it anyway, and I later found out that they actually offered 6 weeks' pay for 4 weeks' leave per year. And the standard at that time was 3 weeks, and I didn't even ask the question at the interview. This temporary 12-month job at Tooth's lasted for 12 years, and it gave me incredible opportunities and lessons. I was a trainee brewer for 2 years, maltster in charge, head brewer at Resch's, brewery manager at Lismore and at Courage Breweries in Melbourne. Tooth bought Penfolds and Wynn's wines in 1975, and I finally applied to do the wine science degree at Wagga so I could move into the winery division. I was in the first group of 10 graduates in 1979 from Riverina College of Advanced Education, which eventually became Charles Sturt University. I never did move into the winery side of the business, as I'd been promoted in the meantime and I was unsure about starting again. But I often do wonder what would have happened if I had changed careers at that time. Despite my never becoming a professional winemaker, I have spent a lot of time and effort perfecting the art of wine appreciation. Actually, I've been a member of the North Shore Beefsteak and Burgundy Club for 40 years, longer than I've been married. An incident that greatly affected me during my early working life occurred in the early 1980s when the industrial relations culture in breweries was extremely confrontational. The relationship between management and unions was appalling, and I adapted my management style and my attitude to that situation. I can recall a respected mentor of mine who was 25 years my senior, but who actually worked for me, taking me aside one day after a particularly heated union confrontation and saying, "Peter, you talk so lovingly about your new daughter and your life away from work. Why have you become such an arsehole at work? You don't have to park the real you at the gate when you come to work." This mentor's comments changed me profoundly because I didn't like the person that I'd become. Since then, I try and understand people's motivations and why they take a particular approach or react in a particular way. And I try to see the positive in any situation and to understand the other view. People who've worked with me over the last 20-odd years have been exposed to a profiling system called instinctive drives. And this has helped immensely in putting measurable parameters around how and why people behave and respond. It's been particularly useful for me in understanding my own strengths and weaknesses and developing and continually challenging highly functional teams of collaborators. I left brewing in 1983 after Tooth & Company were taken over by CUB. CUB had a reputation for arrogance and poor staff morale, so I decided to leave because of the newly developed belief I had in treating people with respect. I moved to the New South Wales Egg Corporation as technical manager. This role was a step back for me, but I was prepared to start a new career and I had confidence that I could grow into the new field. I had made some comments about the existing marketing program during management meetings early on, and after about 6 months, the managing director had a dispute with the marketing director, who subsequently left, and I was goaded into the role. His rationale was that I'd been critical of the marketing program, so I should have a go at doing it better. His confidence in me was liberating. This experience has helped me form my view that if you want to be critical of a situation, then you have an obligation to become involved and to contribute to changing it. You do not have the right to throw stones from the outside unless you're prepared to contribute. I had never worked in marketing or sales, but I did accept the challenge. I learned on the job by trying things, making mistakes, and particularly learning the new jargon. I sacked the incumbent advertising agency because they didn't listen to my warnings to stop wrapping communications in jargon, and so I appointed a new agency. By asking the agencies to prepare a new brief as a sales pitch for the business, I learned a huge amount and the program became mine. Most importantly, I had great people to work with and whom I developed into a great team. In 1985, the team reversed a 50-year declining trend for shell egg consumption. We introduced the new brand, The Good Egg. We put nutrition information on pack. We developed collaborative promotions with the supermarkets. We sponsored Surf Lifesaving. We sponsored a children's pantomime especially written for us. And we launched free-range eggs, co-sponsored by Animal Liberation. This was a lesson that you can work with the perceived enemy if you're prepared to try and understand their motivations. My team launched a complete new range of bakery ingredients and value-added egg products under the Good Food Products brand, and that was eventually bought by Goodman Fielder. We also launched pavlova mix and yolk-free egg mix into supermarkets. I even developed a pavlova using bovine serum separated from abattoir blood waste in place of egg whites. Somehow, this innovation never received enthusiastic acclaim, but the slight pink colour was quite appealing. I had no knowledge of sales and marketing when I took on this challenge, but I did believe in myself and I was prepared to have a go and even fail. This period also taught me to always consider what your customer needs and wants are, whether it's marketing, innovation, training, or even in internal processes. Every process you're involved in has a customer along the value or supply chain, and they must drive your outputs and your commitment. After eggs, due to the deregulation of the egg industry, I started the final 25 years of my corporate career with the multinationals Goodman Fielder and George Weston Foods. During this 25-year period, I've reinvented myself many times over across the bread, milling, margarine, bakery ingredients and innovation categories by constantly being prepared to try something new and to have a go. I've always been passionate about innovation, and I look back with satisfaction at many great products and processes my team and I have introduced. At Goodman, my team removed bromate from bread processing and improved the process and quality at the same time. We removed saturated fats from bread. We introduced the high-pressure Chorleywood bread making process to Australia, and we pioneered mixer redesign with the manufacturers. I was involved in introducing square crumpets and working with Dr. Ian Brown and his team to introduce high maize into Wonder White bread, which became the #1 selling white bread in Australia within 18 months of its launch. These were interesting times at Goodman where significant management restructuring was occurring. I was asked to prepare a redundancy plan by the new managing director to get rid of 24 people from my commercial division, and that included some names that I didn't believe should be on the list. I believed there was a personal agenda in play, so I put my name on the list as well, and I left. It was 1999 when I moved to George Weston Foods as manager of the Speedy Bake business, and within 3 months I was asked to set up George Weston Technologies. I recall my first management meeting at George Weston Foods, when around the table of 12 people, 7 I'd worked with at Goodman, and 2 had been my customers when I was at Meadowlee. It actually reminded me of the old Chinese curse, "May you live in interesting times." During my time at George Weston Foods, my team has worked and developed patents in some really novel new areas. These include waxy wheat, relaunching the whole Bergen range under a nutrition banner and supported by clinical trials. We worked on developing Australian sweet lupins as an ingredient and as a source of functional protein products. We worked on barley beta-glucan separation for health applications. We developed near-infrared technologies to completely replace wet chemistry in flour laboratories and animal feed and forage applications that allowed us to reduce analytical times from up to 3 days to less than a minute, and with much greater accuracy. We've worked in the paper making industry to replace starch with flour, and in the corrugated box industry in the US to develop superior starch-based glues and waterproofing applications. I believe I've developed great teams and nurtured great individuals who I hope would say that I've challenged them to go further than they thought that they were capable of. In 2011, I left George Weston Foods, having spent about 12 months planning my retirement. I vowed to take up golf again after a 35-year break, to get my family history research collated and up to date, and to do more travel around Australia and overseas, and also to continue being involved in a number of industry boards. I was on the board of Lupin Food Australia, Grains and Legumes Nutrition Council, CSIRO Food Futures Flagship, and the University of Tasmania Food Safety Advisory Committee. Life was pretty well organised and complete, so I thought. I was on holidays up in Ballina in January 2012 when I received a call from Anne Bray, who was a General Manager Food and Chemicals in the Department of Industry in Canberra. And she asked me for comments about the food industry and the issues that the industry was facing and what I thought should be done about it. Anne told me that the government was looking to establish a food innovation precinct and that they were looking for a chair to lead it. I remember saying that this was a huge challenge and that they'd need to have a strong chair to manage the competing players in the field. Anne asked whether I might be that chair, in which I instantly replied, "No, I'm retired." I didn't think much about it until next week when Anne rang me again and asked whether I'd thought more about taking the job that she'd offered. I hadn't registered that she'd offered me the job, but I was invited to come down to Canberra for a discussion. The rest is history, and I did agree to become the chair, but only part-time, and at that time only 1.5 days a week. For the next 5 months, until Dr. Miriana Preaker joined FIAL, as Anne and I had called the company, I worked about 6 days a week, and Miriana and I then worked about the same for the next 5 months until we employed a great team to assist. We've all been working flat out since then to implement pilot scale and demonstration programs for the Australian food and beverage industry. On the 1st of July this year, FIAL has been announced as running the new Food and Agribusiness Growth Centre. We'll be employing 4 new experts to assist, and I'm going to resume my part-time involvement and try and bring my golf handicap down to a non-embarrassing level. In the past 18 months, my FIAL team has implemented a range of highly successful programs aimed at building capability of Australian food and agribusiness companies to innovate, to build capability, and to be more competitive locally, and to access the huge opportunities in exporting to Asia. I'd now like to talk about the future for the food and agribusiness industry in Australia. I'm very conscious, however, that 40 minutes is a long time to maintain your interest, and I'm not a Bill Clinton or a Robert Redford, so I'm going to switch to a question and answer session in the hope that I can maintain your interest. To look at what Australian food industry will look like in 100 years, I think we have to look back at the previous 100 years to learn from experience. And I'd like to quote some figures from the FAO, United Nations, on world agriculture. In human history, 7,000 species from about 250,000 edible plants have been cultivated. Today, only 4% of these known edible plants are used by humans. That's 150 to 200. Since 1900, 75% of plant genetic diversity has been lost as farmers move to maximum yielding varieties in both plants and animals. 90% of crop varieties have disappeared from farmers' fields, and 50% of breeds of domestic animals have been lost. Interestingly, 12 plants and 5 animals provide us with 75% of our food. 3 plants, rice, wheat and maize, make up 60% of the caloric and protein consumption of humans. This creates a huge issue for global food security. It is crucial that we maintain genetic diversity to deal with increasing environmental stress, and we need to breed crops for unfavourable conditions like drought, salinity, poor and degraded soils and increasing temperatures. So increasing production over the next 100 years, and you've all heard various people talk about doubling food production by 2050 and all sorts of other statements about trying to increase our productivity in Australia. It is absolutely dependent on how we manage land and water in Australia. When you look at analyses by the National Farmers Federation, they actually cast doubt on our capability of doubling our production. You also hear people talk about food bowl to Asia, the deli to Asia, doubling food production as I mentioned. So what do we need to do to actually do that? We've got to open up Northern Australia to agriculture. We've got to dam and divert rivers that are pouring monsoon rains into the sea. We've got to invest heavily in infrastructure and research that enables food to be grown. We've got to build high-capacity rail and road infrastructure to allow production to get to markets cheaply and rapidly. We've got to build capacity for freight airports in the north. We've got to drop our xenophobic objection to foreign investment, especially from China and the rest of Asia. The federal government's just announced the formation of the Northern Australian CRC as the first step in this plan. My view is that Australia needs to become a niche player for the Asian markets. We've got to explore the unique features and benefits of traditional Indigenous diets. We didn't have diabetes or obesity or cardiovascular problems in our Indigenous people like we do today, and that's the problem with most emerging economies. As they start to use Western diets, they develop these modern obesity-based problems, medical problems. In terms of innovation, we've got to invest to develop new varieties of crops that can be grown year-round, because Australia has an incredible range of climatic conditions from tropics in the north to temperate climate in the south. And we've got to exploit that to be able to supply year-round consistent supply of good quality niche products to the Asian market. Australia will not prosper over the next 100 years if it continues to become a bulk commodity producer. We must differentiate and we must value add. The greatest opportunity in the food processing sector are innovations that reduce our cost and make us more competitive. The other significant area of innovation need are innovations along the value chain, along the supply chain, from raw material production right through to packaging to supply chain enabling technologies. We have to get fresh products rapidly to market. Packaging will be an absolute enabler of that capability. Well, I think we're already seeing personalised nutrition, and I believe that very soon, and I know there are already some apps available for your mobile phone where you can get direct nutrition information around the foods that you're buying. But I think also that we are going to be understanding our own genetic makeups to understand what our peculiar personal needs are. And you'll take an app shopping with you, it'll develop your recipes, your buying patterns, and you'll be actually buying and consuming based on your health needs. So I think personalised nutrition, personalised health management will be things that emerge very much over the next maybe 20 years. And it's not just in Australia, that will be right throughout Southeast Asia. In fact, when you look at China people are much more connected to the internet than we are in Australia. and that's rapidly expanding throughout Asia. So those sorts of enabling technologies will be the absolute norm in a few more years. A good mentor is someone who you can trust, someone who understands you and knows about the industry you're in. I think probably most importantly, it's someone that you're prepared to listen to. It doesn't have to be a boss, it could be a peer, or it may even be someone that's working for you if you have a respect level. My view is that any good manager or leader is a mentor. Well, I see so many times where people are critical of what's happening in certain sectors, decisions being made by companies or government. And I believe, as I said earlier in my presentation, you do not have the right to throw stones if you're not prepared to get in and have a go to change things. So that's what I mean by giving back, to join committees, to become a board member if that's your capability. If you don't feel confident at that level, to join AIFST regional committees, to ask questions in a conference even, to just contribute to having information flow generally being positive within your industry. Well, there are a few things that I talk about before what I want to achieve, because initially there's what the government wants to achieve. And the major thing is for us to develop a strategy for the food and agribusiness sector of what it will look like by 2050. So I have to develop a strategy over the next 12 months that will then drive all investment and programs that the Department of Industry and Science delivers. So things like CRCs, CSIRO, Enterprise or Entrepreneurs Infrastructure Program, the Chief Scientist, are all funded by the Department of Industry and Science. So we all have to be linked under that one strategy, and that is critical. In terms of what we are doing in engaging more widely with the food and agribusiness sector, we need to start thinking about what are the training needs, what are the capability needs to be able to grow and meet the demands of the export markets. And I talked before about niche marketing and value adding. So what's the innovation capability that we need to develop? How do we get companies in touch with CSIRO, with universities, to get access to the technology that will enable those innovative processes to occur? How do I train people? How do we develop an understanding of the insights in the Asian market that will drive the innovation? I talked before about the need for everything to be driven by a deep understanding of your customer or your consumer. So that's extremely important as well. And then understanding the value chain. How do we actually open the value chain up to get rapid access to markets? And we talked before about packaging, for instance, innovation. So I think they're the areas that we'll be focusing on over the next 4 years of our funding cycle. Yes, I am, absolutely. I guess someone who claims to be an innovator is always looking to the future and always looking at what you can improve, what you can do better. And I guess that's about, to me, life, processes, products, anything. So yes, I'm very optimistic about the future.